AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Our host brings you the leading minds in AI, sharing their story, their success, and their advice. Focusing on fast-tracking you to the top, AI in Action cuts through the hype to help you kickstart your data science career. To listen to the latest AI in Action podcast, head over to www.alldus.com/podcast or subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Podcasts.
You're listening to AI in Action. I'm your host, JP Valentine. Our guest today is Jason Christiansen. Jason is the co-founder of Young Alfred. Jason, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on today, John.
It's our pleasure. So Jason, let's start with a background of yourself, where you first got started in technology, what your journey has been, taking us up to today as the co-founder of Young Alfred.
I mean, for me, at least, it started as a kid. I just loved tinkering with toys. I think, it was like Legos and Connects. Connects were the cheaper option at the time, and just building things, creating things. It was a very natural fit to kind of go after engineering in undergrad. And so I did my engineering at a small school, but awesome school, Harvey Mudd College on the West Coast. And another thing that, that kind of exposed me to is just the different mechanics of disciplines across different types of engineering that I wasn't even aware of, right? Like in my mind, I think it was all kind of structural and physical organization of blocks as a kid. And then you start realizing that, society has moved on from that. And now there's all this kind of, middle layer and software and data. And it's almost like everything is behind a terminal these days, right? It's like, how can you process that data and build that software more efficiently? And the other passion I had, in addition to building, was games. Just loved, not necessarily like, a certain type of game, but just like the meta construct of a game, that there are multiple people competing, fixed set of rules. You could start at the same place, you could start at different places. And I don't know, the games are always just fascinating to me. There's like an outcome. Sometimes there's one winner, sometimes there's many winners, sometimes there's varied levels of winners and losers. And really, just the players are trying to optimize that game. And, nothing felt as good as winning to me at the time. So that's kind of where I started my career out of school, was in the world of finance as a high frequency trader. So arguably the biggest game in town is the financial markets, just given the amount of raw data that pulses through those on a daily basis, and also the amount of brain power chasing it. And so I started in 2008 in the financial markets, which was a very interesting time to start in finance, really focused on pulling massive data sets out, organizing them, and then building predictive modeling around them to provide liquidity in the market. And of course, what does provide liquidity mean? It really just, find alpha, find efficient pricing that's better than what the current market provides. And when you feel that there is markets just, detached from what they should be valued at, then you provide that liquidity so that the market volatility is somewhat reduced. And that helps, your larger investors that want to buy and sell. It helps them transact in the market. But opening up that game, if you will, and seeing how it's built and how it's constructed together, it's just fascinating, complex, high octane, very efficient, very highly efficient too. I think that it's something that it's kind of assumed maybe, but it's amazing just how efficient markets have become when you talk about even just transferring liquidity between Chicago and New York. How much money was invested on making that line faster and faster and faster to gain 5 microseconds on that line or whatever. So it was a cool piece of my career to unpack. I spent 6.5 years doing it. I traded in 90 countries, kind of cross arbitrage via ETFs. But it also, I think, some of like the watershed moments I had in that journey were understanding the limits of data, the limits of scale. I think for those that maybe have played around in finance, there's this thing called the Sharpe ratio, which is basically how efficiently your strategies make money with how much risk you're taking at the drawdown. And there was always this trade-off between Sharpe ratio and scale, right? Like you have a really high Sharpe ratio, really great strategy, but how much money could you put behind it? Not usually a lot. And there's another kind of trade-off of low latency and holding period, where you could, say you could trade really fast and turn over shares, but there was, if you want to like realize larger alphas, you have to have longer hold it's almost like the longer holding period you have, you give up Sharp, but you can add scale and add maybe other advantages within the data. So that kind of got me focusing on long-term advantage in just general life. I mean, I think it applies to financial markets, but I think it also applies to life, like being able to think long-term, and not a lot of people have that advantage, or industries or companies even, right? Like everything's managed quarter to quarter in the public financial markets. Startups or in private companies generally can look more longer term because they're not up to that quarter to quarter reporting to investors. But I think seeking out that long-term advantage was kind of that spark moment. Maybe I shouldn't be a high frequency trader long term, for lack of a better word. So that kind of made me think more about like finance versus startups, and brings us to kind of starting Young Alfred. The cool thing about startups and versus maybe like a cool trading job out there is that in trading and investing on January 1, your P&L is zero. You got what you did last year, you get paid out, and you start over from scratch. You're only as good as what you do that next year, and there's no kind of stacking or exponent growth. Whereas in a startup, like every year, you kind of built on what you spent your last 365 days on, and you're getting that compounding effect, right? Like that, I think it was Warren Buffett that said like the most powerful, or one of the most powerful forces in the world is compound interest, and it's something that humans are just not programmed to understand. But in a startup, you can really build with compound interest. Like every year, you get a little bit better. It stacks and stacks, and then you do get these exponent companies all the time, right? You see them, you can read articles about them. I mean, it's a small selection of companies, but it's something you can really only do when you're building some new technology or something new. And it's harder to do if you're just like, investing. It's harder to beat the market over long periods of time. It really is. Very few do it. So, I think that's a little bit of a story of kind of how I meandered to start Young Alfred. I've always wanted to build things.
Yeah, but you've given some good insight into where you start to have the idea behind Young Alfred, just based on your background, which I think is a great segue into explaining the business. So please do, for anyone listening not familiar with Young Alfred, what is the business, what is the product, and what are you guys doing that is different with data?
At its simplest form, Young Alfred helps you buy home insurance, protect your home. If you're buying a new home or you just got a renewal, we're going to help you find the best policy and coverage available for you on the market. And you can buy it entirely through us. And we work with 40 plus carriers in all 50 states in the US in the background. Now, I would say what's unique about Young Alfred, because clearly there's a lot of insurtech out there, a lot of people trying to innovate in the space. It's a massive space. It's fairly legacy that can happen. There's a lot of opportunity to innovate. And so I would say what's unique is that, we all know insurance is complicated, right? No one, I don't think, questions that. Like you start peeling back the onion, if you will, of insurance, and there's more complexity at every layer. And so Young Alfred as a product, how we're differentiated is we're just simple. We're the simplest way to buy home insurance. And that is, I think, very easy to say, but it's very hard for what we had to build under the hood to arrive at that, right? To actually build something that's simpler than everything else out there. And I think it is a very unique value prop for customers, like, and even beyond customers, like think of data, think of modeling, think of just generally, like, I think the acronym KISS, keep it simple, stupid, or whatever. It's like, that is such a powerful acronym that is underutilized in our world. And where you see really revolutionary technology take off, it's usually not some complex, hidden, science experiment that really, it's usually something very simple, but it's implemented in a way that no one had ever implemented it before. And so, I think what we've done in home insurance, it's not super sexy, but it is different, is we've taken out the phone call. We didn't think you should, need to speak with an insurance agent in order to buy home insurance. Of course you could if you want to, but we're also very much part of the generation that doesn't like to talk to people on the phone when we're making a transaction. So, we wanted to empower customers to do that as well. And then the tricky part isn't just doing that for one customer or 10 customers, it's doing it for every customer, for every homeowner in America, no matter how they use their property, no matter what type of property they have, no matter what state they're coming in. And I think we're the only one that's done that in the insurtech space for home insurance.
It's great. And I want to jump straight into the how behind it all, because the offering is so clear. It's you guys do it quicker and more efficient and better than anyone else. That's an incredibly complex problem to solve. So can you give us some insight into the journey behind it all? What happens behind the scenes? Giving us some insight into the data, the engineering, the ML that's been able to get you to this point. I know Young Alfred launched in 2016, so you guys have been doing it over 4 years now. But walk us through the idea from where it first started and what you had to do to get to this point.
I think the cool thing we can do, at least in the insurance industry, right, is we can borrow from the models that already exist out there to kind of explain what we're building. And so if we look at what was insurance before Young Alfred, right, it was 42,000 individual models, and that's mapping to 42,000 zip codes in the US. So there's 42,000 unique zip codes in the US that are all optimized by insurance agents at a local level. So there's human minds, tens of thousands of human minds doing this, but they're all doing it in their just little 30-mile radius. These are insurance agents, right? They're licensed, they're specialized in their trade. And they've had decades to optimize how to sell insurance within that zip code. And so what Young Alfred's doing is saying, all right, there's 42,000 models out there that we need to rebuild in software in a matter of months, right? And it's not just how you quote the policies or how you sell the policies, it's how you fit the right policy to the right person. It's how you understand the complexity of the underwriting piece of the equation. I think a lot of people in insurance skip the underwriting piece, and it's the hardest part of insurance. It's why insurance companies ask so many questions. It's why the pricing is so complicated. And when you think about that matrix, the combination of all those different kind of underwriting rules, it varies by state, it varies by carrier, and it varies by product. So you got 50 states times 40 carriers times 10 products. And within each one of those little squares that we just built in that matrix, there's 100 underwriting rules, right? And so there, some of them might overlap 90%, right? There's a lot of kind of rhyming throughout that matrix, but there is uniqueness too, and that uniqueness needs to be accounted for. I don't think anyone's put that entire model in code, right? Most people say, let's build a reduced model, put that reduced model in code, and then eventually hand it off to a human who can build these really nice, complex maps in their mind, and then the human can solve the rest of it over the phone. And so Young Alfred's taken the approach of, no, we're going to solve the whole thing in code up front. And that requires not only solving it to the front end and the customer, giving them one form that breathes and changes and gives them one simple, beautiful path for it that always is everything we need and nothing more, nothing less. But also on the back end into the insurance carriers, right? Being able to understand all the different ways in which insurance carriers quote, building those integrations as well. So that's, we're by no means, I would say, beaten the current existing incumbent, which is those 42,000 unique local models out there. We're making good progress. We're catching up. But the exciting thing that AI, ML, data science unlocks is once you catch up, once you build that infrastructure, the machines let you go further than any set of humans has gone before, because humans they have their limits, right? They're very good at learning patterns and building models, but they have limits of how many things they can hold in their head at any one time or how many pieces of data they can process. Machines have limits too, but they're much, much higher. And so, that's the exciting part we're kind of getting to, is that frontier where, the machine complemented with some humans, passes the kind of current setup of the incumbent model out there, if you will.
Jason, so I want to now get your take on what it's been like going from high frequency trading to now doing your own startup focusing on insurance. What are some of the main differences, and what has it been like for you and your data team as you build out the product comparative to working with high frequency trading?
Yeah, I love this question actually, because it really gets at the root cause of why I was excited to go from high frequency trading to insurance. I think when you look at where AI ML works beautifully today, it's where you have these large, expansive, clean, simple, relatively speaking, in terms of number of factors, data sets. And finance is beautiful for that, right? Like bid, ask, quantity, price. It's volume. It's not like that many variables, and they're incredibly clean because there's a high demand to consume those data sets. Flip over to insurance. And it's night and day, because you have this very complex, categorical, sparse data set. It's different by state. There's a lot of kind of categories that map 7 to 11 or 6 to 3. And there's no like unified data set out there you just like buy off the shelf and analyze. The other unique thing about insurance is you're kind of, even in the US, you're not really dealing with one central clearinghouse or a few central exchanges like it would be in finance. In the US, every single state has their own Department of Insurance that processes and accepts changes in insurance rates. And even Washington, D.C. has their own. They had to have their own. They couldn't be part of the state. So, we have 51 unique little markets, if you will, that are very undermined, underanalyzed. I would say they're very well analyzed by the insurance carriers who are building the models and trying to build underwriting models for profit, right? Though there's a lot of firepower in the data for the underwriting and the profit because of how much it affects those companies, enterprise value and stock price. But where the I would say brain power has been underinvested is building tools that help the consumer really understand what they're getting in their home insurance policy, and not only understand what the best home insurance policy is for them, but like almost leveling them with the underwriters and showing them what risks they are exposed to so they can make better decisions and analyzing that purchase decision. And so, the team that we want to build at Young Alfred, that we have built and are continue to building, are really people that aren't afraid of messy data. And I mean, like data, data comes in many sets and sizes, right? Everything needs to be cleaned to varying degrees, but I would say, you have to get into model spaces and types of creativity and thinking where you can't just pull it out of the box model and apply it in insurance, right? You almost have to really fundamentally understand the model and build something that kind of rhymes with it, but really fits to your application for your specific business case in insurance. And that's cool. That's exciting. The other thing it does is because there isn't an existing standard, like it's not like no one's buying off the shelf standardized data in home insurance. We can kind of be that standard in a way, right? So someone that wants to go out there and kind of think about how the standard should be set, how it should be organized, what makes it not break at scale, what makes it kind of uniform across all these different vectors like states and property types and carriers. And so someone that wants to be more of a data explorer, I think, as one of our engineers said it on an article he did previously, like you really got to be curious about how can I morph this ball that I've never seen before of data into something beautiful and normalized. And that's true data engineering really at the fringes, right? Like there is kind of very high scale refined data engineering. We try to improve margins, which I would kind of compare or draw the analysis to like a public company, right? You're trying to optimize for margins, but data engineering in the insurance world is much more like you're building a startup within data engineering, building your own data warehouses. You're organizing it and reorganizing it, and refactoring it multiple times, trying to kind of find that solution that no one's really charted for you before. And so that's, we're looking for entrepreneuring data scientists, if you will, entrepreneur data engineers, if you will.
On that point, because you've obviously worked with lots of engineers, lots of data scientists in your career, and now more recently hiring and building a team, what advice could you offer to people listening to this who are maybe in the traditional finance world, in trading, and have an interest in exploring other verticals, but are unsure as to how to make that transition? As somebody who's done it and done it successfully, what would you say to some of your former colleagues who are maybe looking to get out of the trading world and want to do something that's it's more ingrained in data science? What would you say to those guys?
There's a lot of people very attracted by data because, in a sense, data it's the new resource that it's like the new oil. Right? That's been said before, that the more that you have, the more you can analyze it, the more valuable that is on top of whatever else you're building. And so it attracts a lot of talent, right? Smart people that want to maybe do a career switch. A lot of them kind of jump the tracks to data. They could be jumping from many different things, but they could be jumping to data. And I would say, be realistic. An analogy would be like, don't try to go from right-handed to left-handed. Try to learn to write with both hands, if that makes sense. Like you kind of got to combine what you've learned today in a unique combination with data to make you a differentiated candidate in the future. Because I think, some people might overstretch a little bit. They say, I'm going to go completely off here and completely on here. And that's a harder transition to make. But there's a lot of kind of this merging of the two that makes you a very unique candidate, allows you to apply. I mean, data pulses through everything, right? Every marketing departments use data, finance departments use data. It's not just some data scientist writing the next great model. And most data scientists, unless they're at very, very scaled enterprises, they're doing a lot of data cleaning themselves, right? Like that's part of the game. Right? Some people say it's like 80% of the time in building the models is just cleaning data. So, also understand, is that really what you want to do? But I think taking a data lens over any type of career, super valuable. It gives you that hue, right? That silver lining around your career that makes you more attractive. And I think it's a very natural hop. There's a ton of demand for people with that skill set, and it's just about how you can combine it with your existing skill set in an effective way. That's what I would really focus on.
So Jason, staying on the topic of growth, and taking into account all that you've learned from working in previous firms to now building your own business, one of the points that you and I discussed previously was for junior candidates looking to sort of get a competitive advantage in the application process. Many of them will think it's about certifications and extra things you can add onto your GitHub. But what a lot of people seem to miss is the importance of communication when it comes to data science, data engineering, and the ability to interact with colleagues and other stakeholders. Can you give us some insight into what your experience has been and why you see that as being something so important when building out a data team?
Yeah, this is something that's become incredibly more valuable in the post-COVID world. And I think, some people have this idea in their head that it's going to go back to normal, right? I think this is an example of a regime change. This is an example where AI ML is terrible at fitting because it doesn't understand a new regime. It can't fit on the post-COVID world, but we humans can understand a regime change sometimes faster than the models out there, right? And that regime change is that there were certain aspects of the pre-COVID lifestyles that were just simply incompatible with who we are today as a community, as a country, as a civilization. They were just like, there are going to be changes permanently in the workforce. And what it means is a shift towards more distributed, more remote, right? Everyone's been doing that for almost over a year now. There will be teams, and especially more in the engineering side, that this becomes more permanent and more common. And so when you're in these settings, both at the interview stage all the way through your kind of career trajectory into senior leadership, communication is going to be the number one differentiator between you and your peers. It's not going to be about who writes the best code or finds the problem, solves the problem rather the fastest. It's really going to be about how you communicate with your team. And communication is in itself an art, right? Like there's so many vectors to it. And there's different kind of rules, if you will, for different types of, who's communicating. Is it two people? Are they at the same level? Are they at different levels? Is it a group of people? But communication, I would say, is the most powerful tool that no one's really solved in a true ML AI way. We can, for the most part, still differentiate. If you ask enough questions, you can differentiate the machine from the person every time. But, I think we will see that as a human differentiator as you're building your careers. It's just focus on communicating. And generally, I would say if you're not sure, over communicate, because from what I've seen, engineering as a group tends to under communicate. And so I think that is a nice way you can differentiate yourself, is by over communicating, practice and experimenting, ask for feedback on it and all that good stuff. So I know it's not very data ML. It's almost like more, social EQ type of things, but it will be only more relevant as we kind of permanently move to a more distributed workforce.
It's practical, but it's something that consistently comes up because it's so effective, and it's a skill like anything else that can be worked on and developed. So now looking at the journey ahead for Young Alfred, obviously, you've been working on this now for 4 years and you're seeing great success. The product is already delivering great results, but there's a lot more growth ahead. When you look at the scale of the business and where you need to get to, what opportunities are there going to be for others who are interested in data, whether it's on the data cleaning, data gathering, visualization, building the algorithms? What hiring do you expect to see over 2021 and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, we're playing around with a few things in our model right now, but somewhere in the realm of tripling the size of the engineering team in the next 12 months and data team, right, with that, product team with that. It's really what Young Alfred has spent so much time in the first 4 or 5 years building, which I kind of outlined earlier, was just putting all the rules in code, right? Which is kind of like infrastructure groundwork, right? Laying the rails so the tracks can go from A to B, or the trains can go from A to B. So I think the next phase is like, now that you've built this platform, this infrastructure, this connectivity, there's so many pockets to optimize within the entire engine. There's so many kind of like pieces of the engine to pull out, like this gear, let's polish it, put it back in, this gear, polish it, put it back in. So I think there's opportunities within analyzing underwriting across that huge complexity matrix. There's opportunities optimizing the zip code by zip code level data, kind of replicating what exists out there right now in the human minds of all the local agents. There's opportunity in optimizing our amazing kind of embedded customers, right? These are people that are using Young Alfred's tech to open up a digital home insurance marketplace on their website or in their customer workflows. And each one of those customers are unique. One could be a large mortgage player, a large bank, a real estate brokerage, a fintech, a financial advisor. These players all have unique needs and unique streams of customers that would carry their own models in a way, right? And their own kind of optimized processes. And our goal is to really kind of fit that policyholder, that homeowner that's looking to cover their home, fit them where they want to engage with a professional they trust, and then build the best experience for them, right? Like put all the complexity behind the front end in Young Alfred servers, so that to that homeowner that's buying insurance, it just looks like a beautiful end-to-end process every time. And it's not like the complexity is large, right? And when complexities are large, like, I mean, the companies today that we know at scale, the complexities are so large, right? Like a Google, Facebook, like these companies, they have so many engineers, and they could probably be happy hiring 20% more engineers tomorrow if they found the right talent, right? I don't think, definitely Young Alfred's not there today, right? But I don't see a limit to like how many engineers we could eventually hire, because I mean, insurance is, I think, some metrics 6% of GDP. Like, this is a massive industry, right? Like, it's a huge line item. It's dominated by 100-year-old businesses, and some of these 100-year-old businesses, they actually don't get enough credit. Like, they're pretty smart, some of them, right? Like, they're underwriters. Like, it's not like they're doing things wrong or they're using the wrong models or they're not looking at data. Like, they've been doing this for a long time. They've really optimized it. But what the problem with insurance is, they've detached the customer experience from the profit driving center. And what that means is that the customer, like the homeowner experience, is lacking, right? And so Young Alfred can kind of shore that up so that everyone's on parity. And yeah, I don't see lack of opportunity for those who just want to learn more about data science, those who want to grow teams under them and manage people, those that really want to kind of dig into a unique data set that no one's ever seen before. We want them all. We want just people that are kind of data explorers.
Absolutely, yeah. And look, I think the best way to summarize it is, speaking from your own experience, you've worked in some incredible firms, but you're now working in this space. What have you enjoyed most about the transition, and what are you most excited about looking ahead for Young Alfred?
Yeah, I think every startup goes through the early days of like, is it going to work, right? So I think the range of emotion, like when David and like co-founder and I were like, January of 2018, like not really figuring out the chicken and egg problem of a marketplace, just getting started. Like it was a hard start to this business, and thinking of the range of where we came from to now and how it feels to run it now and to see it, bud and grow. I think this might be a personal view, but I generally have a view that, or my personal happiness, I guess you could say, is driven by the range of emotions I experience with something. So like, it's not just like, if you were just happy all the time, right, you wouldn't really be that happy, because that would just be your baseline expectation. And then, it's like people that maybe took drugs and just stayed on drugs a whole bunch, and then they lose the dopamine rush, right? My view is like, you need the range, and really that the wider your range of experiences with anything, with a relationship, with a company, with an employee, with a colleague, the higher hits of happiness you can achieve, right? And so I think at Young Alfred, we've seen such a wide range. From the early days, it was like really dark where we started, to where we are now, and I hope we continue to hit more highs in the future. But that's been the most fun, is really just to see the range, and then also be attached to it in a creator builder way, right? Like some serious part of Young Alfred was my contribution, which is pretty cool. Like that's both the lows and the highs, right? And so I think that's probably the romantic piece of Young Alfred that I look at in my mind.
Jason, thank you so much for that. A lot to learn from this. I think services like Young Alfred are in demand increasingly so, because it's disrupting traditional industries and it's making things easier, which is what the best businesses do. Thank you for sharing the journey, and we wish you guys all the best in the growth ahead.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on the show.
AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Alldus offer an exec search program. Alldus can help you discover how data science and AI can transform your company. With our unrivaled network of C-suite executives and senior AI professionals, we offer retained search services across the US and Europe. For more information, contact mark@alldus.com. Get the Alldus advantage. Become a member of the Alldus community and enjoy some of the following: AI meetups. Once a month, our community gathers to listen to some of the leading experts in the world of data science and AI. Our speakers come from all over the world, including Dublin, Boston, and Frankfurt. We also have our AI mentors. Our experts will provide mentoring to Alldus members. And don't forget our AI in Action podcast. Each week we have guests from all over the world talking us through their education, career, and more. Become an Alldus member and get the Alldus advantage. For more information and to sign up for our newsletter, log on to www.alldus.com. That's www.alldus.com. Alldus International, empowering through AI.